Hello, hello everyone. It's nice to see you. Let's have some fun. Hey everyone, Vicky here. Let's see what adventures we have to share. Well, welcome to Storytime with Vicky. It's lovely to have you all here with me. Well, as you know, we're reading Mr. Men Week. It's Mr. Men Week, and we're on our final story. Our final one, yeah. And our final story is Mr. Greedy. He's greedy. Which we can all be sometimes. And Mr. Greedy is written by Roger Hargreaves and published by Therma Publishing, should I say. Okay then. So get your cosy blankets ready and your cuddly toys and we will begin the story. Mr. Greedy. Okay then. Cool. Mr. Greedy liked to eat. In fact, Mr. Greedy loved to eat. And the more he ate, the fatter he became. And the trouble was, the fatter he became, the more hungry he became. And the more hungry he became, the more he ate. And the more he ate, the fatter he became. And so it went on. Mr. Greedy lived in a house that looked rather like himself. It was roly-poly sort of house. Nice and round. One morning, Mr. Greedy woke rather early than usual. He'd been dreaming about food as usual, and that had made him wake up feeling rather hungry as usual. So Mr. Greedy got up, went downstairs and ate the most enormous breakfast. This is what Mr. Greedy had for breakfast. Toast, 2 slices, cornflakes, 1 packet, milk, 1 bottle, sugar, 1 bowlful, toast, 3 slices, egg, 3 boiled, toast, 4 slices, butter, 1 dish, marmalade, 1 pot. Gosh, that's a lot of food. When he had finished his enormous breakfast, Mr. Greedy sat up in his chair, smiled a very satisfied smile, and thought that was a delicious breakfast. That was a delicious breakfast, he thought to himself. Now I wonder what would be nice to have for lunch. He decided in order to work up an appetite for lunch, he would go for a long walk. That sounds like a plan. That morning, Mr. Greedy walked and walked and walked. Then he discovered a cave. Ooh, that's funny, he thought. I don't remember seeing that there before. Mr. Greedy, being a curious sort of fellow, decided to explore. He entered the dark cave. Inside, he discovered some giant steps leading upstairs. Mr. Greedy, being a curious sort of fellow, decided to climb them. They were very steep and very difficult to climb. But with much huffing and puffing, Mr. Greedy climbed up and up. At the top of the steps, Mr. Greedy came to a door. It was without a doubt the biggest door that Mr. Greedy had ever seen. And it wasn't quite shut. Oh, I wonder what's inside. Mr. Greedy, being a curious sort of fellow, decided to see what was on the other side of the door. Oh dear. So Mr. Greedy squeezed himself through the crack in the door, and there before him was an amazing sight. The biggest room in the whole world. Ooh. The floor was as big as a field. The table in the middle of the floor was as big as a house, and the chairs around it were as high as trees. Mr. Greedy felt very small. Then he sniffed, coming from somewhere up on top of the ginormous table was the most delicious foody smell that Mr. Greedy had ever smelt. Oh, look at that gigantic table. It's huge, it's enormous. So, Mr. Greedy sniffed again and then decided that he must get up on that table. So he began to climb up the leg of the enormous chair. It was very difficult, and it took him a long time. But eventually, Mr. Greedy stood up on the chair. Stood up on the table. Everything was larger than life. The salt and pepper pots were both as big as pillar boxes. There was a bowl of fruit on the table, and Mr. Greedy tried to lift one of the oranges. Look at the size of the orange compared to Mr. Greedy. It's bigger than him. And Mr. Greedy, being Mr. Greedy, took a bite out of one of the apples there. Then he looked around. Over on the other side of the table stood the source of that delicious smell. Ooh, what is it? It looks like sausages, doesn't it? A huge, enormous, gigantic casserole plate. And on the plate, huge, enormous, gigantic casserole sausages, the size of pillows, and huge, enormous, gigantic casserole potatoes, the size of beach balls, and huge, enormous, gigantic casserole peas, the size of cabbages. Mr. Greedy hurried across the table towards the plate, and being Mr. Greedy began to eat. Oh, it's not his dinner, is it? Be like, get off my dinner, you! That's not yours, that's mine! Uh-oh, I think he's got it. I think he found the person whose dinner it was. Suddenly, a shadow fell across the plate, and Mr. Greedy found himself being picked up by a giant hand. Uh-oh. And looking into the eyes of a real-life giant. Uh-oh. And who, thudded the giant's voice, are you? Mr. Greedy was so frightened that he could only just manage to squeeze his name out. Mr. Greedy? He squeaked. The giant laughed the giant laughed a laugh as loud as thunder. Ha 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 ha! Greedy by name and greedy by nature, he bellowed. Well, I think, Mr. Greedy, that you need to be taught a lesson. And what a lesson it was. The giant made Mr. Greedy eat up everything on that huge, gigantic casserole dish. When he had finished, Mr. Greedy felt very ill. I'm not surprised. When he had oh yeah, I said that. Indeed, as if he would burst at any minute. "Now," said the giant in a much quieter voice, "do you promise never to be greedy again?" "Oh yes," moaned Mr. Greedy. "I promise." Do you think he promises? Let's see, shall we? "Very well," said the giant. "Then I'll let you go." Mr. Greedy climbed down from the table and went out through the door, feeling rather fat and extremely miserable. Oh, I'm not surprised he feels fat. Goodness me, that was a lot of food, wasn't it? And do you know what? From that day to this day, that's right, Mr. Greedy has kept his promise. Oh, really? Oh, wow. Mr. Greedy has kept his promise. And do you know something else? Do you know something else as well? Mr. Greedy doesn't look like he used to anymore. He now looks like this, which I think suits him a lot better. Don't you? He's lost a bit of his tummy, isn't he? So if you know anyone who's as greedy as Mr. Greedy used to be, you know what to tell them, don't you? Oh dear, you know what to tell them, don't you? Oh my goodness me. Beware of giants. Dearie me. That's funny. So if you see someone eating too much food, you have to say beware of giants. And you'll know what that means, won't you? Because that giant made him eat the whole plate of food. The whole gigantic plate of food. And those sausages were the size of sofas. Oh, pillows, wasn't it? Pillows. Wow, that's can you imagine that? That'd be big, wouldn't it? Wowee. That's pretty big. That's pretty big. Well, no wonder he felt stuffed and full afterwards. Dearie me. I don't like, you know, a small one's enough for me. Oh, dearie me, that would really hurt my tummy. Oh, it'd make you go pop, wouldn't it? Well, I hope you enjoyed that story. I really did. I hope you enjoyed Mr. Men Week, because I really enjoyed reading that to you. Well, I thank you all for coming. It's been super fun. Off to bed now until the night is done. Good night to you all. Hope you laughed and had a ball. Snuggle down. It's time for sleep. Close your eyes and count some Z's. Good night, come again. See you next time. That's the end. That's the end. See you guys. Bye. Have a lovely, lovely weekend. Bye.